to Dr. Lassina Zebo, who is in Munich, but we'll also be having later on a discussion on local investors and international investors when it comes to tourism in the country. But I want us to just start off with that a particular story now on security in the country, in the continent rather. And all the way from Munich, I'm joined by Dr. Lassina Zebo. He is a former Prime Minister for Burkina Faso and also former Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. Thank you for making time and welcome to KTN News, Dr. Zebo. Maybe just for our audience to understand, you could start by telling us the importance of the Munich Security Conference, which really is a platform given to discuss and debate issues when it comes to security matters. Now, from where you sit, what part do you intend to play when it comes to this particular conference?
First of all, thank you for having me on your studio. Let me say that traditionally, the Munich Security Conference has been about transatlantic issues. As an African, it's always interesting to come and see a discussion between Europe and the other side of the Atlantic. But we see the world security doesn't depend on only those two. I think it's about the global South as well. And then I think Africa has a role to play, especially with what's happening. We're talking about nuclear deterrence. We talk about security as a whole, global security, regional security, and Africa has been suffering from many issues in the past 10 or 15 years. I think being at the Munich Security Conference and integrating all those issues is a good thing to do.
Right, just to understand, how far do you think such conversations really go when it comes to helping and resolving conflict in the continent? You know, there's almost over 40 million people who've already been displaced in Africa due to conflict. Does a conversation like this in Munich really bear any fruit?
Sorry, but I don't know if I heard you well. You talk about how to resolve the conflict. Mm-hmm. Let me say that the conflict this day has changed both in nature and character. I think there is, when we talk about regional conflict, I don't see anything that's been concise to regional issue. They're all interlinked and intertwined. I think we're talking about how the power play is being exercised, how emerging countries are finding themselves, and how they can intertwine their reaction with regard to a continent that is moving and changing, especially with a young population. And its youth, when I talk about the youth, let's not forget that most of this generation, they've studied in Europe, in the US, in China, in Russia, in Turkey. And then when they return to their country, they want to make sure they still play their role the way it is, and then the way they've learned and the way they've been taught.
Right, when you take a look at, for instance, Burkina Faso as a country, at the moment it's actually seen as an epicenter of violence, especially in the Sahel. How do you think this conference, this specific Munich Security Conference, is helping a country like Burkina Faso?
We have a discussion on the security issue in the Sahel. You've seen, I've often said that the Sahel region is a complex one, and then the issue of the security in the Sahel has to do with what's happening what happened in Libya many years ago. I think people had warned about the destabilization of Libya and how it could impact negatively the southern part of North Africa. And that's exactly what happened. We've had a lot of weapons that have come into the south and then have destabilized the government and use a fertile, I would say a fertile framework that was created by poverty, by climate change, and people who had difficulty and then had nowhere to go, then to link themselves with those who were coming with terrorism and violence in the south. Mm-hmm. And I think that's basically what the Sahel is suffering from. And how that affects the Sahel overall is also how the international community sees itself in impacting positively the security issue in the Sahel. I think this has been a different issue, and then people haven't found themselves in a good sync between the perception of the protection or an umbrella that they would have seen traditionally from their cooperation with the Western country or the global North, and then that has created an issue with the younger population in the Sahel region.
Right, you were the former Prime Minister for Burkina Faso, and just recent developments that we've seen coming from that country is that Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger actually put out a notice to withdraw from ECOWAS. I want to know your thoughts on this because they've had certain grievances when it comes to this particular regional bloc. What are your thoughts on it?
Look, as you know, ECOWAS has been one of the most solid regional entity in Africa for many years. Why? Because there was leadership, there was a connecting view among the countries in West Africa, but recently things have changed. And then some of the young generation have had the perception that the regional institution as it is today was not responding to their need or their will or the vision that they had for the continent and particularly the region as well. And when I talk about that, I think we're talking about leadership. Where do we put ourselves? How is ECOWAS reacting to some of the issues? I was, I would say, puzzled by one of the ladies that was interviewed on TV, and then about the situation. One thing she said about West Africa and then the many coups that happen. She said when there is a coup, when there is a coup, the regional institution come and say you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. But the problem is, what should we do? It's not about what we want or what we shouldn't do, it's what we should do and what we can do. I think people are looking for answers, and then when they don't find those answers, they look at other entities, other alternatives. But having said this, I think seeing the fact that 3 countries have recently announced that they're leaving ECOWAS, it's true, it's a fact. But how do we get those countries to dialogue, to have a clear dialogue with the existing framework, and then see how ECOWAS itself can reform its way of dealing with issue in the region to attract more the perception that people have with regard to the failure that they have the perception of. So I think that's something that needs to be dealt with, not only with ECOWAS. I think within Africa, there's a change and then an adaptation that the regional institution will have to do with the younger generation and the perception that they have with the continent and its interaction with the rest of the world.
Right, just taking a look at the Munich Security Conference, the whole idea is to build peace through dialogue. Maybe what are your thoughts specifically when it comes to the role of international partnerships in addressing security challenges in Africa?
Look, the international partnership or international support, as people often put it, I think my personal perception of international support or international partnership is that there is currently a lack of understanding of the change that has happened in Africa for the past 10 years, or even more or less. What's happening is that we have a younger generation that is not, that hasn't, felt or lived the colonial time. A younger generation that needs to see another vision of the continent, and they don't find themselves in sync with regard to their perception of how international support should be. And you cannot sit, I'll give an example, you cannot sit in Vladivostok or Honolulu or any part of the world and then decide on what's happening in a continent where the younger generation is trying to take leadership. What you have to do is to listen to them, cooperate with them, understand them, and in that sense, we have to re-educate, rebuild, and then reframe our way of cooperating with the global South, and that will probably help the support that the international community could have within the continent.
But then how do you balance security concerns with the need to promote democratic principles and citizen participation? Basically, democracy is on this side, and what the citizen wants is also on this side, and then also addressing security challenges. How do you balance the two?
You're breaking?
I'm
Sorry?
saying how, my question is, how do you balance security concerns with the need to promote democracy principles and citizen participation in countries, especially in Africa?
Yeah, look, you've mentioned, if I heard it right, you've talked about democracy. One of the questions that many people or the younger generation, the question they're asking themselves is democracy all about election? That's something that we have to reflect on. Mm-hmm. Is democracy about election? If democracy is about giving to the people what they need and educating the people to understand what you're giving them, and then understanding the perception of your leadership, of your government, I think then we should go into educating and creating the framework where people should understand that. You cannot talk about giving a population a way to choose if you don't help them to understand why they should choose left or right. I think that's something that needs to still be worked on within the continent, and this is precisely the discrepancy that we see. You have the majority of the population that are uneducated and that are now being led by a younger generation that is coming, well-educated, from the West, from wherever in this planet, and then wanting to make a difference and using the existing framework that is there. So there is a balance to be made between those young people that are coming, who have led and been leading within international institutions or private entities, international, that they've been working on, who are seeing the world differently, who are seeing Africa in a different way and wanting to make a difference. And wanting to make that difference is their perception of the democracy in the West and the democracy, how they see it in that part of the world. So we have to balance those two, and that will lead us into making a difference within the security framework that is challenging right now.
Right, as we wrap up the interview now, what are your expectations for this particular conference as it starts today and ends in the next 2-3 days, the Munich Security Conference? What are you hoping to get out of it?
Look, expectation, I think talking about expectation would be, I would say, in my sense, a bit demanding. What I see is what is at stake and how the transatlantic relationship during this Munich Security Conference that has been there for so many years take into account the security issue of Africa. The security of the world depends on the security of Africa. I mean, if you go to the continent, people will say, Europe, where is Europe today with regard to NATO? And where does Europe put itself? We've heard some thinking about rebuilding a security for Europe, and then how that security in Europe could be impactful in the Africa security and the security of the world. We see things moving. People, one thing that I've been talking about is, if there is a void, if you're not there, others will fill it. So let's make sure we don't leave a void that will be filled by people we don't want to fill. And that's something that we should think about. And then I think being and having Africa in this conference is also about making that difference and making this be understood by those at stake at this Munich Security Conference.
Right, that's a good place to end it. Thank you so much, Dr. Lassina Zerbo. That is Dr. Lassina Zerbo. He's a former Prime Minister of Burkina Faso. That is from 2021 to 2022. We were discussing the Munich Security Conference. Thank you so much for your time.